What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we are going to compare all of the 2025 Samsung A series phones. Now, I like to do this because it's interesting to actually see some of the side-by-side differences and similarities within this vast lineup. I don't think most people actually get the chance to see all of them all together like this, though to Samsung's credit, the A series slimmed down just a little bit more this year, so there's only 5 phones to pick from. Well, there's a 6th, but we don't talk about that one. I personally feel that the A series could get away with being just 2 or 3 phones now. I also don't think there's any reason to have an S series FE anymore. I'll talk a little bit about that phone too, just for the heck of it. And I'll also give you my honest thoughts, of course, as to whether or not certain things are worth it. If, say, you're considering the more expensive option or are stuck with a cheaper device, like if the extra camera lenses are of any value, for example, or if there's a big performance bump from one phone to the other. And just so we're all on the same page, these are the 2025 A series phones I'm talking about. All the ones that end in 6. The A06, A16, A26, 36, and 56. Yes, I know not all of these phones were universally released in 2025. Yes, I am aware that the next A series phones, like the A07 and A17, are already available in some regions. You'll just have to cut me some slack here. And if one of you has already commented asking about some other random older A series phone from like 5 years ago, your days are numbered. This is going to be a long video, so pull up a comfortable chair and relax. And might I recommend the Ibotta E3 Pro, this video's sponsor? I recently added this to my own desk setup, and it's been great for both comfort and productivity. Ibotta is the first brand in the world to apply AI technology to ergonomic chairs, and they've created the world's most iconic ergonomic chair, this E3 Pro. It's been a bestseller for 3 years in Germany, France, Spain, the UK, the US, Japan, and China, and it's the world's most adjustable ergonomic chair, with up to 22 different adjustment options. The headrest is a 4-dimensional biaxial headrest. You can raise it, tilt it, slide it forward or back, and even rotate it slightly to match the curve of your neck. The armrests are 6D adjustable, meaning you can move them up and down, forward and back, side to side, pivot them in or out, and fine-tune the width between them. The small adjustments really do make a big difference, especially if you're sitting for long periods of time. There's also a 3-zone dynamic lumbar system. You can adjust the height, depth, and angle, and it actually flexes with your lower back as you lean or shift. This ensures your posture is picture perfect. The seat itself is fully adjustable too. It slides forward and back, which for a taller guy like me, 6'3", means I can have a lot more of my leg actually in the seat. When it's time to relax, the E3 Pro goes back about 140 degrees, and you can lock the tilt angle in place. You can even kick up your feet thanks to its built-in retractable footrest. It's the perfect combination of work and play, focus and relaxation. It's also built sturdy. It's got a steel frame and high-density mesh seat and back. It's tough, supporting some 330 pounds, but also breathable. This chair definitely keeps me cool. If you spend a lot of time at your desk working, gaming, editing, whatever, the Ibotta E3 Pro lets you both sit comfortably and properly, prioritizing posture with plenty of support and crazy customizability to guarantee that perfect fit. Click the links in the video description to check out Ibotta's lineup of ergonomic desk chairs. Your back and behind will definitely thank you. So here are all of the A series lined up in order from left to right, least spec'd to most spec'd, cheapest to priciest. The A06 is obviously on the low end, the A56 is the best in the lineup, and I want to mention a couple of things right off the bat. The A26 here, right in the middle, seems like it might be the perfect choice, but actually this is the least popular one in the bunch. The A16 5G is far and away the absolute best seller worldwide, but I don't think it's the best overall value. That accolade is awarded to the A56 for sure. Price-wise, it's a little difficult to say definitively how much each of these phones are because it depends on where in the world you live, if you have a carrier offer or a trade-in discount, but generally speaking, the A06 4G is about a $100 phone here in the US. The A16 5G had an original launch price of $199, but it's offered for $150 right now on Samsung's website. The A26 5G is $299. I think that's kind of high for this phone in my opinion. The A36 5G starts at $399 and the A56 is $499. Again, you can absolutely find all these phones for cheaper than their full retail price, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what these phones cost in comparison to one another and versus the even pricier S series devices. Now, when it comes to size, Samsung made this super simple. Every one of these phones has a 6.7-inch screen. Apparently, this is what they've determined to be the optimal smartphone. The only real difference is the screen-to-body ratio and the bezel design of the upper two options. The A06, A16, and A26 still have the older selfie camera notch and thicker bottom chin. The A36 and A56 are all screen and look a lot more modern, or at least current. If you've been rocking a budget A-series phone for a few years, maybe you don't mind the old school design, but I think the A36 and A56 do look like much more premium devices. And in 2025, getting a phone with a selfie camera notch feels a little gross. Besides that slight visual difference, in the hand, these phones all feel exactly the same. They're really not any bigger or smaller than any other, at least not significantly so, and I'm sure most of us are used to this 6.7-inch Samsung design now. Around back, things are a little more different. The A06 is really the odd one out here. It has just two camera lenses, more on that in a bit, and both the A06 and A16 have the previous A-series camera design that actually looks more like the current S-series flagship phones and the FE, which is a little strange. The higher tier trio have this new merged camera lens design, which, well, I think just looks bad for starters, but also just doesn't align with any of Samsung's other devices. So it doesn't make any sense. And unfortunately, people are kind of going to know you have some different phone than an S series with these camera setups. The A06 also has a unique lined and textured back cover. No other phone has this. The A16 is a glossy plastic, but jumping to the A26, you do actually get a Gorilla Glass Victus Plus back panel. Same with the A36 and A56. So a bit more premium of a build for these phones, which is also relatively new for the A series. Every phone except for the A56 also has basically the same plastic frame, so in the hand, they all sort of feel the same and are close to the same weight. Actually, even the A56 with its aluminum metal build isn't any heavier. And while the design overall, with the flat edges and similar dimensions, make it seem like all these phones are identical from the outside, there are a few other random differences that make it so they can't share the same cases, for example, and aren't exactly one-to-one copies. They all have literally the exact same volume buttons, probably the same part from the same bin, just in different colors. The power buttons, though, are a little different. The A06, 16, and 26 have physical fingerprint sensors and power button combos, which, I don't know, I still kind of think is nice and convenient. The A36 and A56 have the more premium in-display fingerprint sensors. They're the optical sensors, not the flagship ultrasonic variety, but they work just fine too. It's just a more premium feature for these two higher-end devices. Up top, these phones are all basically the same with a couple microphone holes, and down at the bottom, they all have USB-C ports for charging and main loudspeakers, but you can see that just one has a headphone jack, and that would be the A06, so an unexpected perk for the cheapest phone in the lineup, I guess, and probably the last Samsung smartphone to even still offer this. The other difference is the SIM tray, both in placement and, I guess, features. The bottom trio, A06, A16, and A26, all support micro SD card slots within their SIM trays, while the high-end duo, A36 and A56, do not have SD card support. And I get it, this feature has fallen out of favor, very few phones still offer expandable storage, but some people still find it useful. And get this, while the A06 starts at 64 gigabytes of storage, all the rest of these phones, including the A06 actually, only offer either 128 or 256 gigabyte storage options. So if you opt for the A26, for example, you can theoretically get the same storage capacity as the most expensive A56, but you can also slide in an SD card to double or triple that capacity. Just a little something to think about. The RAM options are also not that different. The A06, 16, and 26 could be spec'd with 4 gigs, which is kind of ridiculous. Don't buy that option. Yes, I bought that option for the A06, very sad. But they can all also have 6 or 8 gigs, and the 2 top A36 and A56 devices can be spec'd up to 12 gigs. Not all these specs will be offered everywhere in the world, and I would just say that at a minimum, 6 gigs of RAM is what you'll need, but 8 gigs is what I'd want. So when it comes to performance and processors, well, here are the current Geekbench scores for all 5 of these phones, so you can do a little comparison. And generally speaking, as you go up the line, the phones do get more capable and more powerful, with some exception, of course. And I would kind of actually divide them into 3 tiers. The A06 by itself, the A16 and A26 together, and then the A36 and A56 together. The A06 is powered by the MediaTek Helio G85, which now is a more than 5-year-old budget chipset. Not great. The A15 5G will have either the Exynos 1330 or the Dimensity 6300. 2-year-old mid-tier processors. The A26 jumps up to the Exynos 1380, which is also about 2 years old and not that much better than what's in the A16. The A36 is a way bigger jump. This phone has the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3 chip, which is probably the fan favorite across the whole lineup. And the A56 is powered by the new Exynos 1580, the most powerful, but plagued by Samsung's less than stellar reputation with the Exynos brand. Now, it's really hard to do a 5-phone speed test, so I'm going to tap on some things on these devices in the background. You can see how they handle certain things, and I'll sort of just yap for a minute and give you my thoughts on performance and also some of the comparisons. First, if you're going to jump from one device to another, I think the best leap you can make is going up 2 devices. So going from the A06 to the A26, or the A26 to the A56, or even the A16 to the A36, you get the idea. That's a much better and more substantial comparison. I mean, the A06 is a pretty slow phone by itself, and going to the A16, I guess, is a decent leap. But going from the A16 to the A26, you're just not going to get a drastically better or faster phone. Same with going from the A36 to the A56. Performance-wise, there's just not a lot that separates 2 devices that are 1 notch apart in most cases. All 5 of these phones are now updated to One UI 8. My A06 just got this update like 2 days ago, seriously. So the software experience is pretty similar across the board, and you don't miss much by getting the cheapest or cheaper phone, except when it comes to some of the Galaxy AI features. Samsung still reserves those for the higher end phones. The odd one out for software updates, though, is once again the A06. That phone was only guaranteed 2 Android updates, and it technically shipped with Android 14, so I guess this phone might be done. As far as the rest of the phones, they get 6 Android updates, so a long road ahead, hopefully, and you can get some decent long-term value out of all of them. My biggest takeaway performance-wise with these phones, honestly, is just that the A06 really is a rough phone to use, and I'm unsure at this point why Samsung keeps releasing this tier. The A16 is the bare minimum device if you want something actually usable, and it performs more than good enough. It's not a bad phone at all, and I think that's why it's so popular. It's the entry-level Samsung that's actually worthwhile. Skip the A26, you get no performance improvements, and if speed and spec is most important to you, well, the A36 kind of feels like the best option, both with the Snapdragon chip and the slightly cheaper price. In addition to the subpar specs, something else that hinders the performance, or at least perceived performance, of the A06 is its screen. All the rest of these A-series phones have some high refresh rate display, either 90Hz or 120Hz. The A06 has a 60Hz display, and not only that, it's also an IPS LCD display, so it's jittery, not very smooth, and has awful off-axis viewing, with lower brightness levels and less punchy colors. The A16 affords you a 90Hz AMOLED screen, and the top trio all have 120Hz refresh rates, with even better Super AMOLED panels. Shockingly, the A06 also has a 720p resolution screen, so not only is it dull, dim and choppy looking, it's also not very sharp, while all the rest of these phones have 1080 resolution displays. Once again, the only wrong choice here is the A06. The A16's 90Hz refresh rate is not going to be that different visually than even the A56's adaptive 120Hz screen. Both phones will feel fast and look smooth, and the AMOLED panel looks super nice too. I always felt that the screens on these A-series phones were one of the top reasons to even consider them, because get this, the 120Hz AMOLED screens on these top 3 phones aren't that different from Samsung's S-series phones. There's almost nothing more here that you could improve on. When it comes to battery life and longevity, once again, Samsung has determined the seemingly optimal battery size, apparently, 5,000 milliamp hours across the board for every single device. That's a good-sized battery, honestly, especially for these bigger phones. And in long-term testing, all 5 of these phones actually had pretty similar endurance. There are a few factors that go into battery longevity: the processor, the screen, and obviously how you use your phone versus someone else. I don't think there are any real winners or losers here when it comes to the battery life. The only extra perk is 45-watt charging for the A36 and A56, while the rest of the lineup has 25-watt speeds. Flipping the phones back around, let's talk cameras. And this actually might be the most obvious difference between them all. The poor little A06 has 2 lenses, a 50 megapixel main and a mystery secondary auxiliary lens that seems to have no user-controlled function. The A16 is where you'll find standard budget phone camera array, 50 megapixel main, 5 megapixel ultra-wide, and 2 megapixel macro. The A26 has the same 3-lens setup, but with a slightly upgraded 8 megapixel ultra-wide. The A36 has the same setup again, except its macro lens gets bumped up to 5 megapixels, and the A56 also has the same 3 lenses, but now with a 12 megapixel ultra wide. So each step up either gets you, well, 1 more lens or an upgrade to one of the 3 lenses. And once again, it's really the A06 that has the most limited camera. No ultra wide lens, no macro lens, which isn't a big miss to be honest, and a handful fewer features in the camera app than the rest of the phones. The other 4 phones, while their hardware differs a little in random ways, the features and shooting modes are mostly the same. The wide angle is useful, there's high megapixel photo modes and an array of other shooting features. Even though some of the hardware differs, you don't get any more features, like further zoom, for example, but it's nice to see some consistency both with what's offered and what's upgraded from one phone to the other. And with the selfie cameras, well, it's a little weird. We go from an 8 megapixel lens on the A06 to 13 megapixels on the 16 and 26, and then 12 megapixels for the 36 and 56. That doesn't really tell the whole story though. The selfie lenses on the top 2 phones are better and newer regardless of the megapixel count. And when we flip through a couple camera samples here, it's interesting to see that you do sort of get a slightly better or at least different looking shot as you go up the line. I think between the bottom 2 or 3 phones and the top 2, A36 and A56, the difference is most obvious. The A06 really, in my opinion, is once again not great on its own, but hopefully this gives you a general idea of how pictures might look with each one of these. You have really similar capabilities and features, just with slightly different looks, better color, more detail, and a better looking shot with each step up in phones. Now, there's a couple more things I think that are important to mention. Yes, there are 2 different A16s, this 5G model and a 4G LTE or regular A16. The regular A16 is available in regions where 5G isn't as widely available, and it has a slightly different processor, but is otherwise not that different at all. There's also an A06 5G apparently that I totally missed this year. And a while back, Samsung actually would release 4G and 5G versions of like all their A-series phones, and even the S-series phones in some regions too. And the A-series phones at least had other random differences, different screens, different cameras, different features, all between 2 phones that shared the same name but with different 4G and 5G network support. Fortunately, that's not the case anymore. And furthermore, I don't think there's any reason to even consider a non-5G phone anymore. So I don't even want to give it any attention because I think Samsung should ditch it completely. But I suspect we will have a few more years of 4G only smartphones. The other thing I have to say is that with all these A series phones available, I really and truly don't think there's any reason to consider the S25 FE. Samsung actually makes comparisons between the A56 and the FE on their own website, and even they can't convince you, or themselves, that the FE is better. And that's because it's not, especially not for $100 more or whatever it is. Unfortunately, it feels like this might be the end of the road for the FE. I think there's just too many other options that are way too similar now across Samsung's entire smartphone selection. Even the A36, which is technically 2 steps down, isn't that far off of the FE now. And like I said at the start, I also think the A series could be streamlined even further at this point. The A16, A36, and A56 are the only 3 that probably need to exist, and maybe even just 2 of those 3. And then Samsung can jump up to 2 S-series phones. Probably don't need more than that either. And if you want to know my preference out of these phones, the A16 5G I think is the perfect entry-level phone, and the A36 is probably the best for most people, though the A56 I think is still the best overall value, especially when you consider the price and how close it is now to the FE. But what do you guys think? I'd love to know your thoughts on anything and everything A series. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.